Hi, I'm Reid, the former Executive Director of the National Lighting Bureau, and we're broadcasting from the studio of one of our sponsors, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers in Washington, D.C. We are here for the 11th Annual Lighting Forum, and we are joined by Hal Wallace, Curator of Electricity Collections for the National Museum of American History, Smithsonian Institution. Terry McGowan, ALA's Director of Engineering and recent inductee to the ALA Lighting Hall of Fame. Mark Lien, Industry Relations for the IES, and the name of this panel is entitled Preserving Our Lighting History, Insights, Lessons Learned, and Fun Facts. Welcome. Well, happy to be here, gentlemen, and I thank you for joining me. And let's start with a fun fact. Many will say that our industry really started as an industry in 1906. The year that IES was founded. And here we are in 2024, 118 years later. How many years experience do you have in lighting, Mark?
Next year will be 50.
50. That is amazing.
I tend
Terry?
Over 60. I started in 1961.
So you have 63 years. Mm-hmm. So almost half of the history. Over half. 100, I had to do the math, yes. Over half of our history, Terry, you have been involved. So congratulations, and we are honored to be here with you.
I hope I can remember all of that.
Well, we're going to test you here. Okay, first question. How it goes to you. What are some of the most interesting artifacts that you have come across in your career with the Smithsonian?
Interesting question. It's like asking who's your favorite child, in a sense. Okay. We have materials related to Edison's Menlo Park demonstration, December 31st, 1879. Incandescent lamps that were used in that demonstration. We have an early fluorescent lamp, one of the earliest test lamps from 1934 in that area.
And you would have one of the early test ballasts as well.
Yes, we have an early sales kit that sales representatives were taking around the country to demonstrate the new technology. And most recently, as in not quite 10 years ago, I collected an early engineering sample of the bright blue LED from Dr. Nakamura, Shuji Nakamura. Okay. So we were able to add that to the collections.
Okay. Yeah. Terry, what are some of the most exciting artifacts, I guess, that you have seen over your career?
Well, there were abundant numbers of different kinds of light bulbs, and I spent many years with GE Lighting in Cleveland, and that was their job, invent new light bulbs as fast as you possibly could, each one better than the one before. So starting with incandescent, going to fluorescent, then high-intensity discharge, and there were several in there, metal halide lamps, high-pressure sodium lamps, and all of the variations of these in between. GE had a display at the GE Lighting Institute in Cleveland, for example, that had over 8,000 individual light bulbs hung on it so that you could see the variations that people went through to make the light bulb and the light fit the product or the application that they were doing. I never would have thought thousands would apply, but there they were, and we showed them to visitors.
So, you know, do you have a favorite source?
Oh, boy.
For what application?
Oh, gosh, that is really an unusual question, and I don't have a favorite source because I got so much good lighting out of all of them, really. Right. My least favorite source is low pressure sodium with its monochromatic color. It just made everything look awful.
Right.
And probably the best one have been some of the things that happened with both incandescent, and this would be halogen incandescent, and now LED, of course, because there's so much you can do with color and brightness and shape.
Right.
And shape is one of those things. You can make a light bulb give light and hide it away, or you can make it into a pretty shape and have it be part of the whole design.
Right. Mark?
When I was doing lighting design in Michigan,
I was in Port Huron, Michigan at a company called Atchison Colloids doing work for them. And Thomas Edison had spent time in Port Huron. They honor him there. I lit the statue for him on the river, but he hated Port Huron. And he made it very clear that that was a place he never wanted to go back to. But while he was there, he made friends with this gentleman named Atchison. And Atchison made a graphite product that's used in computer screens and such things. So I was doing lighting for him, and he said, you know, Thomas Edison was a friend, right? And this is some things he sent me. He had a glass case of Edison artifacts that I'd never seen anywhere, and they were sent to him as a friend from the Menlo Park lab. And of course, if anyone wants to see the Menlo Park lab, it has been reconstructed, including the dirt it was originally on at the Greenfield Village in Dearborn, Michigan. And it
Including the dirt.
including the dirt.
Wow.
That's how detailed Henry Ford was when he brought it there. And he actually had Edison come out during that Jubilee of Light in 1929, and he was very concerned that he got everything right. So he had Edison come in and say, did I do it? Is it just like it was? And Edison said no. It was too clean.
Oh, okay. Very good. Hal?
You mentioned all of the different lighting inventions at GE. I remember something Gil Reiling, the inventor of metal halide lamps, told me when I was interviewing him years ago, was when he was introducing metal halide to GE management in the early 60s. This was a time when tungsten halogen was coming online, metal halides, high pressure sodium was in development, as well as electroluminescence and other light sources. And he said the managers told him, the last thing we need right now is another invention. We're overwhelmed.
That's interesting. Okay, let's go to the next question. And can you, and Hal, again, I'm going to start with you. Can you share some examples of where past lighting trends and applications have reemerged now with LEDs?
Some very interesting areas, especially in terms of production and consumption. The LED revolution that we've been living through raises issues about how much light is enough. Is there too much lighting? Are these things being adopted too and used too much? How bright are they? All of these other issues that the consumers are asking about, and others in terms of environmental impact and so forth. A lot of these questions emerged in the very early 1920s, late 19-teens, 1920s, with the introduction of tungsten filament incandescent lamps. They were much brighter than the carbon filament lamps they replaced. You could look at a carbon filament lamp and not burn your retinas. We have some illuminated in our museum's exhibition, Lighting of Revolution. People were complaining how bright they were. The same, and power companies were complaining, if you push this out, we're not going to be able to sell as much power, so they pushed back. And there's an interesting history there about that. Same thing happened in the late 1930s with the introduction of fluorescent lighting. Not so much the brightness issue, but the issue with the power companies going, we can't put this out because it's going to cost us money. And same thing happened in the 1970s with the introduction of energy efficient lamps, more use of tungsten halogens, compact fluorescence, that kind of thing. And it's happening again with LEDs. The interesting part about this is every time, until recently, every time a new lighting invention has come out, the amount of light that has been used to light the United States, at least, has gone up. Now, that seems to, LEDs may be the exception, according to the Department of Energy statistics. The amount of electricity we're using to light the United States for the last some number of years has slowly been declining, and that's the first time that's ever happened.
That's a fascinating piece of information.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's one important fact there, and that is, what about the efficacy or efficiency of these light sources? Here you have an incandescent bulb that is down around 10 lumens per watt, and then you got a fluorescent lamp that ended up around 80 to 90 lumens per watt. You found HID lamps up in the 100 lumens per watt, and now you've got LEDs at 150 to 200 lumens per watt. Now, instead of me saying lumens per watt, what if I said miles per gallon?
Oh, yeah.
What a revolution that would be in the world of transportation. But here we did it in the lighting industry over these past 50, 100 years, and made everything much less expensive to operate, brighter, and physically to do just about anything we wanted to do, to fit in any kind of luminaire, to project light in any direction of any color, twist a knob to dim it, twist a knob to change its color. We've got a very flexible product these days, and it's remarkable how it's really achieved that through all of the inventions and technology.
Yep. I was thinking as you were saying this that Lawrence Berkeley did a study. In the last 300 years, people have spent the same percentage of their income on their lighting. So that's a factor of how much we value it, right? But because we're spending the same amount of income on the lighting now, and it's so much brighter, we're getting a lot more for that money in terms of intensity, which enables us to brighten the buildings. And of course, we are seeing a trend now in light and health to increase those light levels dramatically in some applications, like Alzheimer's and such things. They benefit terrifically from higher light levels. So people may take advantage of that. It may ramp back up a bit.
What he said, though, is very important, because for how many years have we had lighting to see by and lighting to look at as the two main functions of lighting, as light-a-leer? It was a light-a-leer little phrase. Now we've got light and health, which really is another dimension. It's something new for the industry. We don't know how to best use it yet. We're learning a lot about it. The research is still coming in. But we've got plenty of research, some over 25 years, that says light and human health is important.
Yeah.
And I think that is going to be the future of lighting, where we really consider not just what we can see and what we can do because of that, but how it makes us feel as human beings and how we can optimize that in some way.
And the solid state lighting revolution that you mentioned, that enabled all of that. When we departed in the lighting industry from being part of the electrical industry, which was moving at a glacial pace, the solid state components and such things enabled us to do so much more. So now we can do the color changing, we can do the instant on, we can increase the intensities to what we need. And because we're part of solid state now, we can use those sensors that would allow us to adapt to people's own preferences and patterns.
And one of the very interesting things, talking about brightness and about the amount of light and the intensity, is that now we can decide, is there too much light
Yes.
in a given application? Can you use task lighting, lower the ambient, still have the productivity and the flexibility that the controls today, the computer controls and these programmable devices can give us? You were asking about interesting objects in the collections. One of the things that we collected some years ago was the prototype Color Kinetics programmable color shifting LED that they introduced. I want to say it was 1997 at Light Fair. And
97?
yeah.
That seems early.
It was either 97 or 98.
Yeah, it
Okay.
probably was
97.
because it preceded. It was like Light Fair. A lot of the products are phantom, where they're things that people are working on. They weren't in the market because we didn't see that first viable architectural lighting LED until Presca Lights Downlight in 2005. But in the 90s, we knew LED was coming, and they were already working on it, but it just wasn't quite marketable yet.
Right. But this programmable little device, and it's on display right now in an exhibition at the Natural History Museum called Lights Out. There's always the issue of, as one of my former colleagues said, whoever was first, there's always someone more first. One can say that this little programmable unit is one of the precursors of smart lighting and programmable lighting that we're seeing increasingly in the marketplace today.
So to that point, are there products or applications that we used to have that we don't have with LED that we should have?
Two things for me come immediately to mind, and that's from my personal experience, because LEDs tend not to like heat. Oven lights and lights for use within an appliance that generates heat, that's difficult for them. Also, we found, my wife and I, experimenting with houseplants, that it's only very recently we were able to find an LED that had the right spectral output to where we could replace the incandescent lamp full spectrum with something that the houseplants liked. And there's also still the issue of dimmer compatibility. I've got a dining room fixture in my house that has 10 F-shaped incandescent lamps in it because I've got it on an old touch dimmer that I really like. I don't want to swap out the dimmer, but I'm not sure what LEDs might be compatible with that dimmer, and I obviously don't want a dark and stormy night.
But two things come to mind. So because they're incandescent and they are on a dimmer, I assume you're starting them at lower voltage, and these bulbs are going to last a very long time. And by being on a dimmer, they're really not consuming much energy, and you're getting an incredible look. Right?
Well, I can think of one where LEDs can't do the job: lava lamps. It's got to have light and it's got to have heat.
Easy bake ovens.
That's right.
That's another one.
You mentioned plants. I'm a gardener, and I start all of my plants in January in my office. I use, I have to think for a minute, I use the Luxem light-emitting plasma. It took me a second. So I'm using plasma, and I am getting a great spectrum, and I am getting a good start. And I have struggled with some of the LED lights that I've tried, and they just haven't done it. The ones that I've used haven't, so that works well.
But it's important, I think, to consider where we were years ago. I remember a researcher that we all know who made a public statement in an article that he didn't think LEDs would ever be used in automotive lighting. Well, they do a great job on the front lines now. And stadiums, he said there's no way LEDs will ever be bright enough for stadiums. So even the heat issues, things evolve and change. I guess the problem we're at with LEDs right now is that it's a mature technology, so people have accepted the price and performance levels, and there's not a lot of incentive for manufacturers to improve on them, not as there was early on in the revolution.
But this is a major opportunity. We've had electric lighting now all of these years, decades. We haven't solved some of the basic questions about lighting quality.
We haven't.
Glare, for example, we don't have a metric for it. We've been working on a metric for electric lighting glare now at least for 50, 75 years. Now is the time to do it, and I know there's some research going on that involves that. But this is the time for quality lighting.
I agree.
This is the time where we could make any space a stage and light it dramatically and change that lighting to be optimum for anything or anybody. And I hope we can embrace that opportunity.
I totally agree. And quality of light, I work for the IES, that's our mantra, right? So I understand the quality of light. Glare, and the reason I was smirking and maybe my eyes were rolling a bit is because whenever I hear somebody's working on glare, I went into the IES office for 2 days. I wasn't even working for the IES at the time, but I was just fascinated, and I knew Bill Hanley and Rita Harold, and they said, sure, come on out. So I went through their books, the oldest books, because I wanted to find a parallel to the LED revolution. Was there anything else that was that dramatic, that had that kind of impact, right? And the thing that I found that had the most impact was the conversion from the gas to electric. That was a battle, a major battle. The gas companies fought it. But do you know what the number one complaint with gas lights were?
Glare?
Glare.
Really?
Yeah. number one complaint people have.
Had not heard that in connection with gaslight.
It was in the IES books that I was reading in the office. And I thought, well, if it's been over 100 years and that was their biggest problem,
Right, here we are.
well, we probably aren't going to solve this totally.
That was also, interestingly, one of the issues with the introduction of tungsten filament lamps in the late teens and early 20s. We have in the collections, in our community life collections, a floor-standing Tiffany luminaire with this wonderful, beautiful shade on it.
Real Dale Tiffany?
Yeah, and one of my colleagues was like, we think we can light this up in an exhibition. We want to know what lamps were used in it at the time. And it was just at that cusp where it could have been carbon filament and it could have been first generation, second generation tungsten. And so we got some props out of the collections and we lit it up. And when we put the tungsten lamps in it, the colors were just all washed out. They were just, we put those 16 candle power carbon filament lamps in there and the colors just emerged.
Interesting.
It was such a beautiful piece. And it's like, okay, this was designed for carbon filament incandescent lamps. And you could tell that immediately by this comparison.
Right.
Oh, fascinating.
You mentioned books at the IES. You have a book you brought with you.
I did. I brought a prop here because talk about, I mean, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes, as Twain is attributed as saying. So this book was written by Matthew Lukish, who Terry has met twice, but this was written in 1923. And I was in a committee meeting recently where people were complaining that the public doesn't appreciate the value of lighting. It's like air and water. It's absolutely essential, but we take it for granted. And we need to do something about it. Now, these were some people that were relatively new to the industry, and I respect idealism. But here's what he wrote in 1923. He said, in the present age of abundant artificial light with its manifold light sources and accessories, which have made possible countless applications of light by 1923, mankind does not realize the importance of this comfort. Its wonderful convenience and omnipresence have resulted in indifference toward it by mankind in general, notwithstanding the fact that it is essential to man's most important and educative sense.
Wow.
1923. So we're still wrestling with that one too.
Right.
But it's not a new problem. And other people have addressed it, and of course Lukish certainly does. And that's where we learn from history, right?
In part, yeah. For me, part of the interesting thing about Lukish and what he termed the science of seeing.
That's right. Yeah. Here's the phrase.
Yeah.
The science of
The
seeing?
science of seeing.
Seeing, okay.
Seeing. He's writing at a time, again, when the predominant lamps are 16 candle power carbon, light levels are low. He writes in one of his works that the most important thing an illuminating engineer can do is increase light levels, is to convince people to get light levels up. And by our standards today, the light levels of his time were quite dim. But this became an issue in the 1950s and 60s when light levels got really high and recommended light levels, and the questions were raised. How much is enough? Has that time, Lukish's time that he was mentioning, has that time passed? And this became a recurring question. People like Howard Branston, thank you, and others who were thinking about task lighting in the 60s and 70s were starting to revisit Lukish's work. So his work is very much within that context of his time.
Well, let me give you the next chapter.
Okay, please.
One of Lukish's followers was a man by the name of Bill Fisher.
Okay.
And he was at Nela Park, GE, and he kept thinking about what Lukish had said, because Lukish had an office right down the hall. He was still in the same building. It kind of permeated the atmosphere. But he got the idea that the ideal lighting situation would be outdoors, underneath the shade of a tree, on a warm summer's day. Now think about that visually. You're under the shade of a tree, so it isn't glaring. You're looking at green grass and trees, so you're not looking at bright glaring things. The sun is shining, it's putting thousands of foot candles down. And here you are, you're going to read a book. You've probably got several hundred foot candles on that page, but no glare and great color.
Oh, that's really great.
To Bill Fisher, carrying out what Lukács had thought of, that was ideal. How can we make that happen with electric lighting? That was one of Fisher's objectives. And he built an office around it. And out of that came fluorescent lighted spaces of 100 to 150 foot candles at the time on the task areas.
Yeah.
People would say, well, that's too glaring. So he worked with another group to build the first louver that could reduce glare. It could make the ceiling darker than the walls and the floor. And this louver was called the parabolic wedge louver, and it was shiny. And they're still in use today. You can walk down a hallway and the light is all around you, but it's not up on the ceiling where you typically see it in a grocery store, for example. So that was a major step forward in the improvement of lighting quality by controlling glare for interiors.
Yeah, of course, it reduced the light output by about 50%.
Oh yeah,
so
it was
the
not very efficient.
But it was a good trade-off
Yeah,
in many
it was a good
cases,
trade-off,
right? When you were talking about light levels, I'm on the IES Progress Committee. I've been on it since 1991. It's been around since 1911, and it monitors advancements of the art and science of lighting every year. So for the centennial in 2011, we researched.
2006, excuse me.
No, not the IES centennial.
Oh.
That'd be 2006. For the centennial of the Progress Committee,
I beg your
which
pardon.
started in 1911, or yeah,
I beg your
1911.
pardon.
So we put together a slide from each year of the progress report from 1911 to date. We had the appropriate accompanying music from that period, right? And some of the early 1900s, they were touting that this department store was now lit to 4-foot candles. And they were happy with that. But then as you went on, like you mentioned in the 50s, Hal, 350-foot candles were being used in some places because it ramped too far. It was like a pendulum swing. And then it came back.
Because they could.
Because they could. And I think the energy crisis that prompted the acceleration of LED into the marketplace too, I think that brought levels way down, and we may have another pendulum swing coming back.
Terry, if you could speak to major manufacturers or major lighting designers, and I think you do, what advice would you give them?
Ooh. Well, there's a lot of history of lighting design, of course. It went on inside the manufacturers and the fixture people and the interior designers who kind of specialized in lighting. But really, the whole profession of lighting design came out of the theater. So many of the early lighting designers, especially those in New York City, of course, surrounded by theater. And yes, and all of these folks made their name in theater lighting and then moved into commercial industrial lighting and continued it. And that was an explosion of talent going into the lighting industry. And it still continues today. It's its own profession. And that still sets lighting apart. It's not a utility. It is a specialty. It's an art. It's a science of its own. And that's something that we have to not only preserve, but we have to grow because it, as we said earlier, affects even human health these days, not just the way we see. So all of that story is worth preserving, and it's worth knowing more about, and it's worth our efforts to include in the education of people. How many times have you gone into a big box store and looked at the light bulb shelves, which seem to extend for a long time,
They do.
and have seen people kind of standing there looking puzzled and what am I going to do here? And how many times have lighting people gone up and say, you know, you look kind of puzzled. Can we give you? And thank you. And all of a sudden you're in a light bulb discussion about how color and brightness and everything else works. Our industry has done a terrible job of selling lighting to consumers so they know what the potential is.
Oh.
We need to do better.
Very insular. We talk amongst ourselves.
I will typically say, yeah, let me take that daylight bulb out of your hand. Let's put that back on the shelf.
Yes.
Now let's look at something a little bit different. Okay, what advice would you give to manufacturers and or to lighting designers?
One of the clear recurrences, and again, as you say, we can't step in the same river twice, but things happen, is the utility of standardization. And look at the historic, artifacts in terms of light bulb bases. In the 1880s, 1890s, there were 24 easily or more different kinds of bases.
Okay.
I've heard in discussions in the lighting industry recently complaints, especially from specifiers, about, I don't want to specify a particular LED product because in the 2 to 3 years it may take for my project to get final approvals, I'm not going to be able to get that product anymore because the manufacturers are changing their product lines, they're incorporating new inventions. They're incorporating new thoughts about environmental sustainability and reusability and all of these other issues. And so this idea of trying to settle on some standards that would give specifiers, designers, so forth, a little more confidence, that would be something that the manufacturers could do. Now, obviously, there are antitrust issues and things of that nature, but that's why there are committees with
Right,
the
and
IAM and
organizations,
so
and
forth
standards.
to do that. So that would be something that you can look at historically, and it's still an issue to this day.
Not as bad an issue though,
Well,
because
I
those
think
chips
it's growing. I
every
think
6
it's
months
growing.
those chips were being improved upon for a long time. Now that period of time is greater, but you're still right. In 3 years, they may not get the same product.
Well, it's the same thing, and in my work with the American Lighting Association, what we've done is we've tried to bring it to the forefront to think about, because should I put in my home a lighting fixture with sockets so I can change the bulbs if something fails?
Yeah.
Or should I use an integrated fixture where it's all built as one, and if it goes out or becomes faulty, I may have to throw it away. Several $100s to throw it away because an LED has failed or a driver?
Yeah.
That doesn't make any sense, and environmentally that's a disaster.
Indeed.
So we need the Illuminating Engineering Society and others to say, we've got to do some environmental thinking here and make standards where it makes sense, so we don't have to throw away expensive artistic fixtures, but we can service these in some way. And we need to be able to use that flexibility the LED has given us to make very tiny fixtures or very different shapes and sizes and colors. But how do we maintain them? So we have to come up with a maintenance approach and a connection approach and a standardization approach that makes these practical and reasonable and environmentally friendly.
Yeah.
Because we've saved a lot of energy, and that's a positive environmental statement, but we need to take that next step and make the products themselves.
So we had that with the bulb,
Yes.
because you would replace the bulb.
That's right.
Do you see the bulb ever going away?
I sure don't in my lifetime. Well,
No.
which may be short.
Hope not.
But I think there's still going to be a place for light bulbs because of their shape, because of their history, because of the ease it is for consumers to buy them and use them. And over generations, these people have, favorite lamps, as we were talking about before. We're not going to throw away a designed lamp that has great historical value, and we're going to want a bulb to fit in those sockets.
That's true.
And this is where the average ordinary retail consumer comes in, because somebody drops $200 or $300 on a new integrated lighting fixture that, whether it's the driver or a couple of the chips or whatever, fails within 6 months or a year or even 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
And they have to throw that $200 or $300 out. They are not going to like that.
No.
And the feedback that the industry is going to get from something like that, will, play into this.
Yeah.
Mark, closing comments?
Well, you asked about what advice we'd give to manufacturers and designers. The industry's at a really interesting point right now because similar to when we converted to LEDs and the traditional sources were maturing, we're at a mature point with LEDs. That part of the industry is really slowing down. The momentum's there to finish the conversions and retrofits that need to be done at this point. But in terms of improving the product, the incentive really isn't there, and it's starting to slow down dramatically. We aren't seeing the lumens increase very much. What we're seeing now, though, is something different than we had 20 years ago when the traditional lighting matured, and that's a convergence with a number of other peripheral industries that are possible because solid state enabled it. And those peripheral industries are going to play a big part in our future. So not just the sensors and the audio visual and all of these components that we can integrate and take advantage of other industries' innovations, but even AI and quantum computing, these things that are coming are going to, AI of course is already being used in manufacturing, design, voice activated controls of lighting and everything else, but it's just going to continue to expand. So my recommendation would be that they look at these converging technologies. I go to technology conferences every year. I do the MIT ones and others just to see what's coming. They don't talk about lighting, but you can see where it's gonna collide with us. And I would think they should be looking to what's coming, because the changes are going to be very different than what we've seen in the past. LEDs are here. There's nothing to take their place unless somebody can figure out how to manipulate daylight into buildings better. They've been trying that since the 1800s too.
Right. And they have gotten better about doing
It's
that.
gotten better, but it still doesn't. I mean, if you have an inner room, it's really hard to effectively bring light in and distribute it.
No doubt. Closing comments, Terry?
Well, I think you've asked some great questions here, and it leads me to think that we are in a period of maturity. The LED has made us think, and it was an explosive change, and people are still getting used to it. But we now know that we've got to become very much acquainted with the quality of light. It isn't going to be new LEDs all the time. It's going to be how we use them to maximize their impact on vision, on health, and other characteristics that we feel are important for lighting to do. And to me, that's a refinement. We can call it the age of refinement, perhaps, because all of these things are available to us, and they're tools, and we need skilled people, the lighting designers and others, who know how to manipulate it, who understand it perfectly, and can control it, because we now have controls, digital controls of all kinds. We can put this all together and come up with lighting of a quality we've never had before. And it can work for humans and plants and the environment in a way it has never worked before. And I think that should be the goal.
Hal, closing comments?
One of the interesting things that I see looking back at lighting history is just how much lighting became an ironic, invisible technology. In Edison's day, lighting was something that was in transition. Prior to the 19th century, lighting was something people did on their own. They went out and gathered the firewood, they went out and either made or bought candles, whatever. It was a personal responsibility. But with the growth of the gas lighting industry in the 19th century, that became a system. It became something that you tied into. And people began to enjoy the convenience of just being able to turn the light on and turn the gas jet off. Edison riffed on that. That was his business model. That was his technological model. He wanted to see that for electric lighting. And he was adamant with telling people, his franchisees, if we are selling lighting, we are not selling electricity. If people are not satisfied with their lighting, they're going to reject electricity and electrification across the board. Now, he didn't quite win that argument, but throughout the 20th century, lighting became so convenient at the user standpoint. For most users, it became an invisible technology The only time you noticed it was when you flipped that switch and nothing happened, or it went bink and it's gone. That changed in the late 20th century with the energy crisis. The education that went on brought lighting back to the fore. And even into the LED era in the 90s and early aughts, that was still the case. But now it looks like it's receding again. LEDs are becoming, as you say, a mature technology. They're becoming more ubiquitous. And people are, again, not really thinking, on the average consumer, not really thinking about lighting. It's receding into that black box of technology. And especially if you get to the point where you need an electrician to come in and change the light bulb because it's not a light bulb. That is something that, again, this system approach,
we wanna do
invisible
that.
technology,
Well, gentlemen, this was an excellent talk. Thank you very much.
Great questions, Randy.
Indeed.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Yep, and for pulling us all together. It's wonderful.